I personally liked Gone Home back when I played it a few years ago, even though it's a basic walking simulator that doesn't offer any traditional gameplay. The thing that made it stand out positively among the sea of games light on gameplay and heavy on narrative was that the process of rummaging through this house and figuring out who the people living there were was made interesting by all the little things you could find and how those changed your view of its inhabitants. It was a perfectly well-told story presented in a lovingly crafted, highly detailed world. There was also absolutely no need to remake it, but that's exactly what the developers did with their second outing, Tacoma. Okay, that's a facetious claim that obviously isn't intended to be taken literally. It's not just Gone Home
in space,
but it's the same concept transplanted to a different setting. You're sent up to the titular space station in order to find out what happened there. So once again, you get to explore an empty location and get to know people by what happened before you arrive there. The critical difference this time around is that the way you get to experience what happened isn't through objects, letters, and notes strewn around the place. Well, not exclusively, because those are still part of the experience. And I do have to say that the sheer number of varied, fully modeled and textured objects you can pick up and examine is staggering. There are tons of books with uniquely designed covers and fully written abstracts and commercial products with logos, names, descriptions, ingredients, etc. But the main way you experience the narrative is through an augmented reality layer that shows you recordings of the crew before they left the station. You don't just hear their voices. This time around the developers went and did something that few walking simulator developers have attempted. They modeled actual living beings and rigged and animated them. They obviously didn't take it upon themselves to actually model detailed faces, but hey, at least they gave you some actual human facsimiles. The interactive part of these recordings is realized by the fact that you can't listen to everybody at the same time, so you have to continuously rewind these recordings and move about the station and follow the people talking in order to get the complete picture. But the necessary information that you have to retrieve is usually not something that the people say out loud. Rather, there are certain points of the recordings that highlight whenever the AR layer of any of the crew is currently active, and you have to find those spots on the recordings, look at what they're seeing, and once that's done in one section, you can advance to the next one. The bare bones gist of the narrative is that you're there to retrieve these recordings, to piece together events, and in the end salvage the station's artificial intelligence. It turns out that there was an emergency on board and you can observe the crew and how they deal with this fact and what they do in order to save themselves. There are also additional recordings, usually in the crew quarters, where you can see each of them doing something on their own, which were recorded before the emergency took place. There are also very few instances of puzzles to solve, though they boil down to observing what numbers are recording pressed on a keypad and then using that code to enter a locked off part of the station. Why on earth you'd need to lock off any part of the station with only 6 people who are constantly monitored and recorded by an AI is beyond me, because it doesn't really add much to the experience to solve these puzzles, and if something were to go awry, they could just examine the records of the AI to determine who's at fault. You might have noticed an inkling of criticism before when I mentioned that you don't actually need to pay attention to what any of the people are saying in order to complete the game. And that's actually a large part of why I felt that Tacoma was significantly less enjoyable than Gone Home. What people are saying is not important in order to achieve your goal here. You can ignore 99% of what they're saying and just focus on the segments of the recordings that give you access to their AR overlays. And you don't even need to read any of those, since your knowledge about these people is never tested at any point of the game. You don't have to figure out where something is by what they say, and even though you can pick up hundreds of objects and closely examine them, there's absolutely no point in doing so. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity, because there's no need to get to know these people or the world they inhabit. There's an enormous amount of detail that went into these characters. You can really get to know them and their mundane lives and problems through their interactions as well as through how their living spaces are designed. But it would have been cool if getting to know them was also something that you needed to do in order to complete your quest. Because let me be honest here, I just didn't find any of the people on this station or the game lore at large to be all that interesting. Heck, large parts of the interactions are even more boring than my own. And I don't think anybody would pay me $20 so I could tell them how my day was and what problems I solved at work. Towards the end, the plot of the narrative thickens somewhat and introduces some intrigue, but by that point the game is pretty much already over, and once you're done on the space station and head back to your ship, there's literally no payoff. I'm not going to spoil any of it here, but let me just say that it touches on aspects that many stories before Tacoma have dealt with, and it doesn't do a particularly good job at utilizing them here. In the end, I can't really recommend Tacoma. Yes, it's wonderful to look at with nicely designed environments and objects, and the people you can get to know are nuanced and multifaceted with voice acting that really manages to make them come alive. But their personalities and what they experience are just there to be experienced as a passive observer. I'm tempted to say that this would be better realized as a piece of non-interactive fiction, but as a character study it's too insubstantial even for that, because it doesn't delve deep enough into what troubles these people and how they deal with their problems. So unfortunately, I have to say that even though the developers were able to pull off this experiment once with Gone Home, Tacoma only further highlights the problems walking simulators suffer from and ultimately doesn't manage to overcome them.